My name is Sarah, and for 37 years, my mother, Eleanor, was my entire world. I loved her with a fierce, unwavering devotion that only a daughter can truly understand. Every birthday, every holiday, I poured my heart into finding the perfect gift, something that would make her smile, something that would show her just how much she meant to me. I believed, with every fiber of my being, that she loved me just as fiercely in return. I was wrong, terribly, catastrophically wrong. The day everything shattered was her 55th birthday. The air in her meticulously decorated living room in Scottsdale, Arizona, felt heavy, thick with an unspoken tension I couldn't quite place. I'd spent weeks planning a surprise party, inviting all her closest friends, baking her favorite lemon chiffon cake from scratch, even commissioning a local artist to paint a portrait of her beloved rose garden. I watched her unwrap each thoughtful present, her smile a little too tight, her eyes a little too distant. When she finally got to my gift, a framed collection of our old photographs, chronicling a lifetime of shared memories, her expression didn't soften. Instead, a cold, hard glint entered her eyes. She looked at the photos, then at me, and the words she spoke next cut through me like a surgeon's scalpel. Precise and utterly devastating. "Sarah," she began, her voice devoid of any warmth, "the best gift you could ever give me, the only thing I truly want, is for you to leave my life, disappear, and never come back." The room, moments before filled with polite chatter and the clinking of teacups, fell silent. I felt the blood drain from my face, my carefully constructed world crumbling around me. Her friends, their faces a mixture of shock and pity, averted their gazes. I stood there, paralyzed, the sweet scent of lemon chiffon suddenly sickening. It wasn't just a request, it was a command, delivered with a chilling finality that left no room for doubt. My own mother, on her birthday, had just disowned me. I walked out of that house, not just leaving a party, but leaving behind every expectation, every hope, every dream I'd ever held about my family. The Arizona sun, usually a comforting warmth, felt like a harsh, unforgiving spotlight exposing my raw, gaping wound. What kind of mother could say something so cruel? What had I done to deserve such a brutal dismissal? These questions, relentless and unanswerable, became a tormenting echo in my mind. For months, I drifted. I sold my small art studio in Sedona, packed a single suitcase and drove east, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the ghost of the life I'd known. I ended up in a tiny, forgotten town in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, the misty peaks a stark contrast to the desert landscape I'd fled. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media, and tried to erase Sarah, the dutiful daughter, from existence. But you can't outrun betrayal. It clings to you, a cold shadow, shaping every decision, every interaction. The resentment simmered, then boiled. It wasn't just anger. It was a profound, aching sense of injustice. I replayed her words endlessly, dissecting them, searching for a hidden meaning, a reason, anything that could make sense of her cruelty. There was nothing. Just the chilling clarity of her rejection. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a deliberate act of emotional annihilation. Then, 6 months after I disappeared, a cryptic email landed in my junk folder. It was from an anonymous sender, simply titled "The Truth About Eleanor." My heart hammered against my ribs. Part of me wanted to delete it, to continue my solitary exile. But a stronger, darker part, fueled by that burning resentment, demanded to know. I opened it. What I read in that email didn't just shock me, it shattered the last vestiges of my naive belief in my mother. It wasn't a single revelation, but a meticulously detailed account of years of manipulation, deceit, and a chilling secret my mother had kept hidden. Not just from me, but from everyone. This wasn't just about my banishment, it was about a lifetime of lies, a carefully constructed facade designed to protect her own dark agenda. The email revealed something about my past, about my true origins, that made my blood run cold. It painted a picture of my mother not as the loving, if sometimes distant woman I'd known, but as a calculating architect of my entire existence, using me as a pawn in a much larger, much darker game. This wasn't just personal, it was a grand deception, a betrayal that reached far beyond a single birthday. The resentment transformed into an all-consuming obsession. I had to know every detail. I had to understand why. And most importantly, I had to make her face the consequences of her actions. My peaceful mountain retreat became a war room. Every waking moment was dedicated to uncovering more of the truth, to piecing together the fragments of my shattered past. I was no longer just a hurt daughter, I was a detective on a mission, driven by a relentless need for justice. What I discovered next, about the true cost of my mother's secrets and the lengths she would go to protect them, would force me to confront her in a way neither of us could have ever predicted. The stage was set for a reckoning that would change both our lives forever, but only one of us would walk away whole. My name is Lena, and for years, I believed in the unbreakable bond of family. Growing up in a small, weathered house on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona, my world revolved around my mother, Clara. She was a force of nature, a woman whose beauty was only outshined by her ambition, or so I thought. Our home, a modest two-bedroom with a perpetually sun-baked yard, felt like a sanctuary, a place where dreams were whispered and futures were planned. I spent countless afternoons sketching designs for a fashion line, a shared fantasy Clara had always encouraged. She would tell me, "Lena, your talent is a gift. You're going to be bigger than all of us." Those words were the fuel that kept me going, especially when the Arizona heat made everything else feel stagnant. The central conflict, the one that would unravel my entire existence, began subtly, like a hairline fracture in a seemingly solid foundation. It wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow, insidious erosion of trust, starting with whispers and culminating in a brutal, public declaration. For years, Clara had been nurturing a dream of her own, opening a high-end boutique in Scottsdale, a place far removed from our humble beginnings. She spoke of it constantly, painting vivid pictures of silk dresses and sparkling chandeliers. I poured my heart into helping her, working odd jobs after school, saving every penny, even sketching logo designs for her imaginary store. My emotional stakes were intertwined with hers. Her success felt like my own. The first tremor of betrayal came when I overheard a phone conversation. Clara was talking to someone about a significant sum of money, an investment. Her voice was hushed, almost conspiratorial. "No, she doesn't need to know about this part," she'd murmured, glancing nervously towards my room. My stomach tightened. What didn't I need to know? I dismissed it, telling myself it was probably a surprise, a secret gift for my upcoming birthday. "Lena, don't be so suspicious," I chided myself. "Clara loves you." That was my mantra, my shield against any creeping doubts. The second, more significant crack appeared when I found a stack of legal documents tucked away in her dresser. They weren't about the boutique. They were property deeds, loan applications, and business registration forms, all under a name I didn't recognize, Clara's Creations. But the address wasn't the Scottsdale location she'd been raving about. It was a downtown Phoenix address, a completely different, much smaller space. A knot formed in my chest. Why the secrecy? Why the different name, the different location? I confronted her, my voice trembling. "Mom, what is this?" I asked, holding up the papers. Her face, usually so open and expressive, became a mask. "It's nothing, Lena. Just some old ideas. Things change." Her dismissiveness stung more than a direct lie. The final, devastating blow landed on my 18th birthday. I had planned a small celebration at our house, just Clara and me, a tradition we'd cherished since I was a little girl. I baked my own cake, a slightly lopsided chocolate creation, and waited. She arrived late, her eyes distant, her smile brittle. Before I could even light the candles, she handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a delicate silver locket, engraved with "To Lena, my brightest star." It was beautiful, but the sentiment felt hollow, a performance. Then, she took a deep breath, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond me, somewhere far away. "Lena," she began, her voice flat, devoid of the warmth I remembered. "The best gift you could give me today would be if you left my life." The words hung in the air, sharp and cold, slicing through the festive atmosphere, through my very soul. My heart seized, a painful, crushing blow. I stared at her, utterly bewildered, searching her eyes for any sign of a joke, a mistake, anything but the cold finality I saw. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What are you talking about?" She finally met my gaze, and in her eyes I saw not love, not even anger, but a chilling indifference. I'm opening my boutique, Lena. The real one. The one in Scottsdale. And I need a fresh start, no baggage. No distractions. She gestured vaguely around our humble living room, as if it, and by extension, I, were some kind of unsightly stain she needed to erase. You remind me of everything I'm trying to leave behind. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only by the frantic hammering of my own heart. The chocolate cake sat untouched, its candles unlit, a symbol of a celebration that had died before it even began. Every memory, every shared dream, every loving word she had ever uttered felt like a cruel deception. The silver locket, heavy in my palm, suddenly felt like a chain, binding me to a past that was nothing but a lie. My mother, Clara, the woman I had adored, the one who had promised me the world, had just disowned me, casually, like discarding an old piece of furniture. In that moment, surrounded by the familiar warmth of our home, I felt an icy dread seep into my bones. The resentment I had vaguely felt earlier solidified into a hard, bitter lump in my chest. This wasn't just about a boutique, it was about a fundamental betrayal of everything I believed in. And as I looked at her, truly looked at her, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: Lena, you will disappear. And when you return, she will understand the true cost of her ambition. The words echoed in my mind, a venomous mantra: Lena, you will disappear. And when you return, she will understand the true cost of her ambition. The air in our small house, once so comforting, now felt thick with unspoken resentments. Every glance from Clara, every casual remark, seemed laced with a hidden agenda. The girl who had once sketched fashion lines with boundless hope was gone, replaced by a calculating stranger. My heart, once so open, had begun to calcify, hardening against the woman who was supposed to be my anchor. The bitterness, a slow-acting poison, was seeping into every fiber of my being. I started small, almost imperceptibly. My after-school jobs became more lucrative, but the money no longer went into the boutique fund. Instead, I opened a separate secret account. I learned code, devouring online tutorials late into the night, my screen illuminating the grim determination on my face. The internet became my new sanctuary, a place where I could plot my escape, piece by agonizing piece. Clara, oblivious in her grand plans, barely noticed my withdrawal. She was too consumed by her own reflection, the shimmering image of her future success. Her calls became more frequent, her voice filled with a brittle excitement as she spoke of potential investors, of prime real estate in Scottsdale. Each word was a fresh wound, twisting the knife of betrayal deeper. One sweltering afternoon, while Clara was out, I found a stack of documents tucked away in her desk drawer. They weren't just business plans, they were legal papers, outlining a partnership agreement. And there, in black and white, was the name of the investor, a prominent real estate mogul, notorious for his cutthroat tactics and his deep pockets. My mother, my naive, ambitious Clara, had walked right into a viper's nest. A cold dread settled over me. This wasn't just about her using my money, it was about her reckless gamble with her entire future, a future she'd once promised we'd build together. The resentment morphed into something far more dangerous, a chilling resolve. I wasn't just disappearing to hurt her, I was disappearing to protect myself from the inevitable fallout of her ambition, the final straw, the one that snapped the fragile thread of my remaining affection, came on her birthday. I had spent weeks crafting a handmade card, filled with heartfelt memories and promises of unwavering support. I even bought a small, antique silver locket, something I knew she'd always wanted. When I presented it to her, her eyes, usually so sharp, barely registered my presence. She snatched the card, scanned it quickly, and then, with a dismissive wave of her hand, declared, "Lena, the best gift you could give me is if you just left. Left me to pursue my dreams without your constant neediness." The words hung in the air, sharp and unforgiving, cutting me to the bone. My carefully constructed facade of indifference crumbled. The locket slipped from my trembling fingers, clattering onto the tiled floor. That was it. The last vestige of the loving daughter I had been died right there. A strange calm descended upon me after that. The tears wouldn't come. There was only a hollow ache where my heart used to be. The decision, once a whisper, became a roar. I would leave, I would vanish without a trace. But not without a plan. My coding skills, once a hobby, became my weapon. I meticulously researched the real estate mogul, digging into his past, his business dealings, his vulnerabilities. I learned about shell corporations, about offshore accounts, about the intricate web of deception that fueled his empire. Clara, in her desperate pursuit of grandeur, was about to become collateral damage in a much larger game, and she didn't even know it. The week that followed was a blur of calculated actions. I sold what little I owned, converting everything into untraceable cryptocurrency. I secured a remote coding job that paid far more than I had ever imagined, a job that would allow me to work from anywhere, anonymously. I left no forwarding address, no goodbye note, no hint of where I was going. My departure would be as silent and absolute as a ghost vanishing into the night. On the eve of my flight, I stood in my empty bedroom, the walls echoing with the ghost of childish laughter and broken promises. I looked at the faded pencil marks on the doorframe, charting my growth, and a bitter smile touched my lips. Clara had wanted me gone. Soon she would get her wish. But she wouldn't just be losing a daughter. She would be losing the only person who truly understood the cost of ambition, the price of betrayal. I booked a one-way ticket to a small, isolated town in the Pacific Northwest, a place so far removed from the scorching Arizona sun that it felt like another world entirely. The air there would be cold, damp, and cleansing. It would be a place where I could shed the skin of the naive girl I once was, and emerge as something new, something forged in the fires of betrayal. The resentment simmered, a constant low-burning flame, but it was now tempered by a cold, precise determination. My disappearance wouldn't be an act of weakness. It would be the first move in a game Clara didn't even know she was playing. And when the time was right, when her world inevitably began to unravel, I would be ready. I would be waiting. My self-imposed exile began with a single symbolic act. I packed a small duffel bag, leaving behind everything Clara had ever given me. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a mausoleum of broken promises. I didn't leave a note, didn't make a sound. The silence of my departure was a stark contrast to the cacophony of emotions raging inside me. I simply walked out the door, the Arizona sun beating down on my back, a new kind of heat, one of righteous anger, simmering beneath my skin. My destination was vague, a whispered promise to myself to find a place where Clara's shadow couldn't reach. I ended up in a dusty, forgotten corner of New Mexico, a small town called Redemption, ironically enough. The first few months were a blur of cheap motel rooms and even cheaper ramen. My days were spent working 2 minimum-wage jobs, scrubbing dishes at a diner by day and folding laundry at a laundromat by night. The exhaustion was a welcome anesthetic, dulling the sharp edges of my pain. Sleep came easily, a heavy, dreamless oblivion. But during the quiet moments, the anger would resurface, a persistent hum beneath the surface of my new mundane life. I saw Clara's face in every reflection, heard her dismissive tone in every critical word. This wasn't just about money, it was about the deliberate, calculated dismantling of my trust, the casual cruelty of her deception. She had not only stolen my future, but had also stripped away the very foundation of my past, turning cherished memories into bitter ironies. One sweltering afternoon, while wiping down a sticky counter at the diner, an old television in the corner flickered to life with a local news segment. A familiar, overly enthusiastic voice was gushing about a grand opening. The camera panned, and there it was, Clara's Couture, a gleaming, opulent boutique in Scottsdale, exactly as she had described it, but now a cruel reality. My breath hitched. The logo, the one I had painstakingly designed, was emblazoned above the entrance, a mocking testament to my unwitting contribution. The reporter interviewed Clara, who, with a dazzling smile, spoke of her lifelong dream, her tireless dedication, her solo journey to success. Not a single mention of me, not a hint of the years I had poured into her ambition. My hands clenched around the damp rag, knuckles white. The rage that had been simmering finally boiled over, scalding my insides. That night, sleep offered no escape. Every detail of Clara's interview replayed in my mind, each word a fresh cut. Her eyes, once filled with a warmth I now realized was entirely feigned, now held a cold, calculating glint. The way she gestured, her perfectly manicured hand sweeping across the luxurious interior of the boutique, was a performance, a masterful act of self-aggrandizement. I remembered the nights I'd stayed up late, sketching designs, dreaming of the day we'd open that store together. The memory was a poison, seeping into every corner of my being. I wanted to scream, to shatter something, anything, to release the torrent of indignation. But instead, a different kind of calm settled over me, a chilling stillness. The resentment solidified into something harder, sharper. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine, it was about exposing the lie, dismantling the carefully constructed facade that was Clara's life. I knew I couldn't confront her directly. She would simply dismiss me, twist my words, play the victim as she always did. No, this required a different approach, a surgical precision. I began to research, spending every spare moment at the town's tiny public library, poring over business journals, legal precedents, anything that could give me an edge. I learned about corporate structures, about the delicate dance of public perception, about the vulnerabilities of a business built on shaky ground. My mind, once consumed by artistic dreams, now devoured facts and figures, seeking patterns, weaknesses. I was no longer just Lena, the hopeful artist. I was becoming Lena, the strategist, the architect of a quiet, inevitable reckoning. Clara had believed her secret was safe, buried beneath layers of deception and the sheer audacity of her ambition. She had no idea the quiet storm was already gathering. I was no longer waiting, I was preparing. The silence in the house became my greatest weapon, a cloak for the meticulous work I was doing. Clara, oblivious in her self-made bubble of impending grandeur, barely noticed my quiet withdrawal. She was too busy planning, too busy dreaming of a life that excluded me, a life built on the very foundations she'd shattered. I watched her, a predator observing its unsuspecting prey, noting every phone call, every hushed conversation, every new designer dress that appeared in her closet. Each acquisition was a fresh wound, a tangible representation of the money she'd stolen, the future she'd snatched away. My research led me down rabbit holes of corporate law, financial regulations, and the intricate web of small business loans. I spent hours hunched over my laptop, the screen illuminating my determined face in the dark of my room, while Clara slept soundly down the hall. I learned about venture capital, about seed funding, about the precarious tightrope walk of a startup. The boutique, her grand vision, was not just a dream, it was a carefully constructed house of cards, and I was about to introduce a very strong gust of wind. I discovered that the investor she'd spoken of so conspiratorially was not some faceless entity, but a man named Richard Thorne, a notoriously predatory lender known for preying on desperate entrepreneurs. He offered quick cash, but his contracts were laced with clauses designed to ensnare, to strip away assets at the first sign of trouble. Clara, blinded by her ambition and perhaps her own arrogance, had walked right into his trap. She hadn't just borrowed money, she'd mortgaged her future, and unknowingly mine as well. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The money she'd taken from my college fund, the supposed investment in her dream, was not just gone, it was tied up in a high-interest loan with a man who would show no mercy. It wasn't just about her failure anymore. It was about the potential ruin of everything we owned, everything I had left. The house, our only tangible asset, was collateral. My resentment morphed into a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about survival. One evening I found the loan documents. Clara had hidden them in a locked drawer in her study, a place she thought was impenetrable. But I knew her habits, her hiding places, the subtle ways she tried to keep secrets. The key was tucked inside a ceramic bird on her bedside table, a sentimental trinket I'd given her years ago. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. As I read through the dense legal jargon, my blood ran cold. The interest rates were astronomical, the repayment schedule impossibly tight. There were penalty clauses for missed payments that would make your head spin, and a final, chilling provision. If she defaulted, Thorne had the right to seize all collateral, including the house, within 30 days. Clara wasn't just building a boutique, she was gambling with our home, with my future, with everything I had ever known. And she was losing. I began to craft my strategy, not just for her downfall, but for my escape. I needed to ensure that when her world crumbled, I wouldn't be caught in the debris. I started applying for scholarships, for jobs in other cities, anywhere far from the suffocating dust of Phoenix and the shadow of her ambition. I sold some of my old sketches online, small sums, but enough to build a tiny escape fund. Every dollar was a step towards freedom. The day Clara announced the grand opening date for Clara's Couture, her voice bubbling with a joy that felt utterly false to me, I simply nodded, offering a tight, almost imperceptible smile. She didn't see the storm gathering behind my eyes, the meticulously planned sequence of events already set in motion. She saw only my quiet acquiescence, another sign of my supposed obedience. She had no idea the silent architect of her destruction was sitting right across from her, calmly eating dinner. The confrontation I had imagined for so long, the screaming, the tears, the raw outpouring of pain, now felt inadequate. It wasn't about a dramatic scene anymore. It was about precision, about timing, about the cold, hard facts that would unravel her carefully constructed facade. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of my emotional breakdown. I would be the calm before her personal hurricane. I made contact with a local journalist, someone known for their investigative pieces on predatory lending. I fed them anonymous tips, fragments of information, enough to pique their interest but not enough to reveal my hand. I hinted at a story of ambition gone wrong, of a vulnerable entrepreneur caught in a ruthless financial trap. I carefully omitted Clara's name, letting the journalists do their own digging, their own connecting of the dots. I wanted the truth to emerge, not from my accusation, but from an independent source, making it undeniable. The article, when it finally broke, was devastating. It didn't name Clara directly, but the details were too specific, too damning, for anyone in our small community not to connect the dots. It exposed Richard Thorne's unethical practices, and by extension, the precarious financial footing of his clients. The story painted a picture of desperation and exploitation, and though it didn't explicitly mention Clara's Couture, the timing, just weeks before her grand opening, was catastrophic. The whispers started, then the outright gossip. Her carefully cultivated image began to crack. The grand opening, once a symbol of her triumph, was now looming as a potential disaster. I was preparing for the final act. The week leading up to the grand opening of Clara's Couture felt like a slow-motion car crash. Every news outlet, every social media feed, was buzzing with the scandal. My meticulously crafted story painted a picture of desperation and exploitation, and though it didn't explicitly mention Clara's Couture, the timing, just weeks before her grand opening, was catastrophic. The whispers started, then the outright gossip. Her carefully cultivated image began to crack. The grand opening, once a symbol of her triumph, was now looming as a potential disaster. I was preparing for the final act. I watched from a distance as her carefully constructed world crumbled. The pre-orders for her lavish garments, once flooding in, dwindled to a trickle. Influencers who had clamored for invitations to her exclusive pre-opening events suddenly developed scheduling conflicts. The once gleaming facade of her dream boutique, which she had poured every stolen penny into, now seemed to reflect the harsh light of public scrutiny. Each cancelled order, each withdrawn endorsement, was a tiny victory for me, a confirmation that my plan was working. This wasn't just about exposing her, it was about dismantling the very foundation of her pride, brick by agonizing brick. The night before the grand opening, I drove by the boutique. Lights blazed inside, illuminating Clara's frantic silhouette. She was there, alone, surrounded by racks of untouched dresses and empty display cases. Her movements were sharp, agitated, a stark contrast to the poised, confident woman she had always presented herself to be. A perverse satisfaction settled in my stomach. She was finally feeling a fraction of the isolation and despair she had inflicted upon me. The air was thick with her desperation, a scent I had come to recognize all too well in my own darkest hours. This was it, the culmination of years of quiet suffering, of planning, of waiting. The day of the grand opening dawned, clear and unforgiving. I arrived at the Scottsdale Fashion Square early, blending into the small, curious crowd that had gathered. The usual red carpet fanfare was conspicuously absent. No velvet ropes, no photographers jostling for position, no champagne flutes clinking. Instead, a handful of local news vans idled at the curb, their reporters looking bored, occasionally glancing at their watches. The few guests who arrived seemed more interested in rubbernecking than celebrating. They whispered behind their hands, their eyes darting towards the entrance of Clara's couture, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity on their faces. Then, Clara emerged. She wore a dress of shimmering gold, a stark attempt at defiance, but her eyes, sunken and shadowed, betrayed her. Her usually impeccable hair was slightly disheveled, and a tremor ran through her hands as she fumbled with the key to the boutique. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a brittle, almost desperate energy. She forced a smile, a grotesque parody of her former charm, as she greeted the sparse crowd. It was a performance, and a poor one at that. Every strained laugh, every overly enthusiastic gesture screamed of her unraveling. A reporter, bolder than the rest, stepped forward, microphone extended. "Clara, can you comment on the allegations circulating online regarding your business practices?" Clara's forced smile wavered. "There are no allegations. Just baseless rumors," she stammered, her voice thin. "This is a day of celebration," a dream realized. Another reporter chimed in. "Sources suggest your initial funding came from questionable sources. Is there any truth to the claim that you exploited vulnerable individuals to finance this venture?" The blood drained from Clara's face. She looked around wildly, searching for an escape, for a friendly face, for anyone to rescue her from the spotlight she had once so desperately craved. Her eyes, wide with panic, finally landed on me. I stood at the edge of the crowd, unmoving, my expression unreadable. For a split second, recognition flickered in her eyes, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated terror. The gold dress suddenly seemed less like a statement of triumph and more like a shroud. "Lena?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, a desperate plea in the single syllable. The sound of my name, uttered by her in that moment of public humiliation, was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It wasn't a question, it was a dawning realization, a sudden understanding of the architect of her downfall. The color drained from her face, leaving it ashen. Her carefully constructed facade shattered completely. The reporters, sensing a break in her composure, pressed in, their questions a barrage of accusations. "Is it true, Clara? Did you abandon your own daughter? Are these rumors connected to your past, to your family?" Clara stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth. The gold dress, once a symbol of her ambition, now seemed to mock her, its brilliance highlighting her sudden pallor. Her eyes, filled with a raw, agonizing pain, locked onto mine again. This time, there was no plea, only a profound, devastating understanding. She knew. She finally knew. The weight of her betrayal, of her abandonment, crashed down on her in that public arena. The dream she had built on a foundation of lies was crumbling before her very eyes, and I, her discarded daughter, was there to witness every shattering piece. The grand opening of Clara's couture became the very public spectacle of her undoing. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and panicked whispers, felt charged, almost electric. Clara, her face a mask of disbelief, stumbled back from the podium, her carefully constructed facade shattering like the crystal vase I'd once accidentally knocked over in our living room. Her eyes, wide and unseeing, darted around the room, searching for an escape, a hidden door, anything to erase the image of her unraveling. But there was nowhere to hide, no corner dark enough to swallow the truth I had just laid bare. Every flashbulb, every murmured comment, every pointed finger was a nail in the coffin of Clara's couture. A ripple of shock went through the crowd, quickly morphing into a wave of disgusted murmurs. I watched, a strange detachment settling over me, as the very people who had fawned over her just moments before now recoiled, their faces etched with a mixture of pity and revulsion. The investors, the socialites, the fashion elite, they all turned away, their initial fascination replaced by a cold, cutting judgment. Her carefully curated empire, built on the stolen designs and the discarded dreams of her own daughter, was collapsing in real time. It was a spectacle, a macabre performance, and I was the conductor. Clara's gaze finally landed on me, and for the first time in years I saw not the cunning manipulator, but a flicker of the woman who had once held me on her lap, sketching fantastical gowns. That fleeting image was quickly replaced by a raw, unadulterated hatred, so potent it felt like a physical blow. Her lips contorted, but no sound came out, only a strangled gasp. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the frantic clicks of cameras and the retreating footsteps of disappointed patrons. This wasn't the triumphant launch she had envisioned. It was her public execution. A security guard, a burly man with a bewildered expression, moved to escort her away, but Clara shook him off with surprising force. Her eyes never left mine, burning with a silent accusation. I felt nothing but a hollow ache, a profound emptiness where I expected triumph to reside. This wasn't revenge. It was the final, bitter chapter of a story that should never have been written. The years of resentment, the gnawing feeling of betrayal, the obsessive planning. It had all led to this single devastating moment. The showroom, once a vibrant testament to Clara's ambition, now felt like a tomb. Lights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows that danced around her shrinking figure. I watched as she was finally let out, her head bowed, her shoulders slumped, a broken woman. The whispers followed her, a chorus of condemnation that would echo in the hallowed halls of Scottsdale's elite for years to come. Clara's couture would be nothing more than a cautionary tale, a whispered scandal, a fleeting stain on the polished veneer of high society. In the aftermath, the silence was almost unbearable. The last of the onlookers had dispersed, leaving me alone amidst the wreckage of a dream that was never truly hers. The dresses, once symbols of aspiration, now hung like shrouds, their vibrant colors muted by the harsh reality of what had transpired. I walked among them, touching the silk, the lace, the intricate beadwork. Designs I had poured my heart into, now forever tainted. The irony was a bitter taste on my tongue. My art, once stolen, had become the instrument of her undoing. The news spread like wildfire, fueled by the insatiable appetite for scandal. The headlines screamed of Clara's downfall, of the prodigal daughter's revenge, painting me as both victim and villain. The calls started coming in. From reporters, from distant relatives, from people I hadn't heard from in years. They wanted details, explanations, a deeper dive into the raw emotional drama that had unfolded. But I had nothing more to say. The story was over. The days that followed were a blur of interviews I refused to give, messages I left unanswered, and a quiet contemplation of what I had done. The satisfaction I had so desperately craved never fully materialized. Instead, there was a profound sense of loss, not for Clara, but for the daughter I once was, the girl who had believed in an unbreakable bond. That innocent belief had died a long time ago, replaced by a cold, hard cynicism. I sold the rights to my designs, the ones Clara had stolen, to a small, ethical fashion house known for its fair practices and commitment to original artistry. The money wasn't the point. It was the recognition, the validation that my work, my talent, was truly mine. It was a reclaiming of what had been taken, a small step towards rebuilding a life that was truly my own, free from the shadow of her betrayal. The sun still beat down relentlessly on Phoenix, but it felt different now. The heat, once stifling, now held a promise of new beginnings, of a future unburdened by the past. I didn't hate Clara anymore. The raw, burning resentment had faded, replaced by a quiet understanding of her flaws, her ambition, and ultimately, her self-destruction. The cost had been immense, a childhood lost, a family fractured, a heart scarred. But, in the ashes of her empire, I found a fragile peace. The justice I sought wasn't in her public humiliation, but in the quiet reclaiming of my own life, piece by painful piece. The resolution wasn't a triumphant roar, but a soft, steady breath, finally free. I watched the last of the embers die in the fire pit, the smoke curling into the cool night air like a final, fading breath. My phone lay beside me, a silent, heavy presence. Hours had passed since I'd sent that last, definitive message to my mother. The message that laid bare every secret, every betrayal, every calculated move she'd made to dismantle my life. I hadn't expected a response, not really. Her silence, in its own way, was the loudest confirmation. The initial rush of adrenaline, the fierce satisfaction of finally unleashing years of suppressed pain, had slowly receded. What remained was a hollow ache, a strange mix of triumph and profound sadness. S. This wasn't the explosive confrontation I'd once envisioned, the dramatic courtroom scene or the public shaming. It was quieter, more insidious, a slow, deliberate unwinding of her carefully constructed facade. I had pulled the thread, and her whole world, built on lies and manipulation, was unraveling. My grandmother, bless her wise, weary soul, had been the unexpected key. After that awful birthday, after Mom's cruel pronouncement, I'd stumbled into Grandma Rose's house, broken and adrift. She'd listened without judgment, her eyes holding a deep, knowing sorrow. It was Grandma Rose who, over weeks of late-night talks and shared cups of chamomile tea, gently started to reveal the true tapestry of our family history. Not the pretty, sanitized version Mom always presented, but the raw, tangled truth. She spoke of Mom's own childhood, shadowed by a domineering father and a mother who was emotionally absent. Grandma didn't excuse Mom's actions, but she helped me understand the roots of her fear, her desperate need for control, her inability to truly love. Mom hadn't just rejected me, she'd rejected anyone who threatened her fragile sense of self. My success, my independence, even my simple happiness, had always been perceived as a direct threat to her carefully curated world. The ultimate revelation came when Grandma Rose, with a sigh that seemed to carry decades of unspoken grief, handed me a worn leather-bound journal. It was my grandfather's, filled with his meticulous handwriting. In it, I found entries detailing his deep regret over a business deal that had financially ruined a close family friend. The very friend whose son Mark Mom had always vehemently forbidden me from seeing. The journal revealed Mom's active role in covering up her father's misdeeds, a desperate attempt to protect their family name and, more importantly, her inheritance. My entire childhood, every casual warning about Mark, every dismissive comment about his family, had been a smokescreen. She hadn't just disliked him, she had been actively complicit in a deception that dated back decades. That journal entry was the final devastating piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about a pattern, a lifetime of calculated self-preservation at the expense of others. My mother wasn't just a cruel parent, she was a master manipulator, a woman who had built her entire life on a foundation of carefully constructed lies. The revenge I sought wasn't about inflicting pain, not anymore. It was about truth. It was about dismantling the illusion she had so meticulously crafted, not just for me, but for everyone she had ever touched. The message I sent wasn't just a litany of my grievances. It was a carefully constructed narrative, backed by the evidence from my grandfather's journal, revealing the full extent of her deceptions. I didn't just expose her, I exposed the very core of her existence. A shiver ran through me, despite the warmth of the lingering summer night. I wasn't celebrating. There was no triumphant roar, no fist pump into the air. Instead, there was a quiet, profound sense of release. The weight I had carried for so long, the burden of her rejection and my own desperate need for her approval, had finally lifted. I had faced the monster under my bed, and it turned out to be just a woman, deeply flawed and terribly afraid. The future stretched before me, vast and undefined. There would be no dramatic reunion, no tearful apology. That chapter was closed. What remained was the work of rebuilding, of learning to trust my own judgment, of forging connections based on honesty and genuine affection. I had lost a mother, but I had found myself. And in that quiet moonlit moment, I knew that was the greatest victory of all.